We are at Dunbar High School, and I am very delighted to be able to speak to Carl Burnside, a dear brother in Christ, a great friend of New Hope Presbyterian Church. Many of us have been grieved by what we have been witnessing in the last several days, and I thought it would be very important as a church, a part of a community, to come out and get a perspective from a man like Carl Burnside. And so, Mr. Burnside, I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Pastor Eddie.
Mr. Burnside, you've been a lifelong resident of Fort Myers and an educator in Fort Myers for 35 years. Can you give us your perspective on the present condition of racism and race relationships in our community and now and in the past and into the days ahead?
This unrest is really sad, and it's sad for all of the United States. Had a lot of conversations with different people of all backgrounds. The concern isn't just within one ethnic group; it's across the board. I think unfortunately, it's not a total surprise. And I think when I really think about it, I think that it's due to the fact that conversations need to be really ongoing, and it can't just be. We have an event right now that's a catalyst for a lot of conversations. And I think those conversations are good conversations to have. It really bothers me to see some of the level of chaos that's resulted from it. I don't think that's necessarily the way to respond. Any of the reactions, and some of the reactions, of course, are overt with the unnecessary vandalism and the violent response. But when I think about a reaction, I'm talking about the silent protests or those protests of respect that are done in a respectful way. The reason that is that way is, first off, we had a definite visual, which everyone saw. It just kind of, with a lot of people, especially of African American descent, just being totally candid, it made it real. I can think of myself and thinking of situations where I knew that I was in certain situations that if I didn't respond in a certain manner, it could possibly escalate because of my ethnic background. Yeah. When I originally moved 22 years ago to my gated community, I was just out doing an exercise walk and had officers stop and ask me for ID, and which I wasn't carrying ID because I was just walking.
And that was in Fort Myers.
And so I think what you're really seeing is a frustration of the silent, who have basically silently tried to figure out what do I need to do in order not to have an issue. That's why I think what it is. You're really seeing a lot of frustration that's festered for decades.
In your 22 years in Fort Myers as being an educational leader, have you seen, have race relationships and perspectives and racism itself become less, more?
So here in Lee County, yeah, there are some things that have gotten better, but unfortunately, there are some things that are still suppressed. There are not a whole lot of New Hopes that are out there reaching out to make those type of connections, and so what happens, we would rather kind of not. I think, and I understand it, we don't really want to acknowledge it because it makes us feel bad. And who wants to feel bad?
Yeah, exactly.
I think in order to really try to end racism, you have to educate about multiculturalism. When I've come to New Hope, and listen, I have always appreciated the financial support and New Hope has provided. But if you really listen, each time I come, one of the things I always thank the congregants for is the presence. Yeah. The fact that I want kids from diverse backgrounds on my basketball team, from for a lot of who don't have a lot, who maybe are not trusting of the dominant culture,
Yeah.
to see that there are people for no reason except for love that are willing to support them and smile at them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, to me, that's the most important piece. Those are the types of things we have to have. Are things better? I would say things have improved. I think, though, you think of the book by Jim Collins, Good to Great, that the biggest enemy to great is good. So I think sometimes we get complacent. So as a society, and so what happens, we don't keep striving to have greater relationships, to continue to open ourselves up. So when you don't do that, unfortunately, hatred and racism doesn't settle.
In light of the present civil unrest, what is your greatest hope, and what is your greatest fear in light of what is presently going on that we've been watching on our television sets recently?
My greatest fear is that we get so caught up in our two-party political system. I honestly feel like a lot of that happens is it becomes more about who I'm with than what's right and what's wrong. And the reason that's my greatest fear, because then we won't spend the necessary energy and time to really come up with solutions.
Yeah.
Because we're too busy trying to stay within our lines.
Yeah.
Now, my greatest hope is that maybe it has to take something really big, and hopefully not bigger than this, so that we can really have those real conversations. So we can have the people who help make decisions, let's start holding them accountable.
Yeah.
One of the things I've said to some, and within the African American professional community, one of the things we talk about, and I've seen different texts we've shared, the way to combat this, get out and vote. Let's make sure our voice is heard. Tearing up a business or some of the other things, that's not what makes the difference. Let's make people accountable.
Mr. Burnside, one last question. We just really appreciate your time. We hear a lot these days about institutional systemic changes. For some that makes sense, others it doesn't make sense. What I want to know from your perspective is what can our church do to encourage your students and be salt and light in this community? From your perspective, how can we respond and help be the solution with racism in this community?
Right, sure. I am going to address, though, just real briefly, the issue about institutional change.
Yes.
While I don't believe that institutional change, making policies, is the way that long term, however, we've seen through history, sometimes there have had to have been, and that's why I was talking about the government earlier. There have been times in history where government has made changes in statutes and things of that nature in order to make people stretch themselves, so to be compliant, for whether it was school integration, whether it was voting for women. Yes. I mean, we can go through history.
Absolutely.
So at times there are times for institutional change, and I do believe that there's some institutional policies. That's why I was referring to earlier about voting.
Yes.
That would help with that. However, what we really want is commitment and a committed behavior. I think the most important thing, and I can't say this more than enough, is that having that visual presence, people seeing, people there who don't have to be, to different supporting kids.
Yes.
Maybe like one of the things, maybe when kids are doing something and they notice something, sending a note to the kid or to that group.
Yeah.
Hey, New Hope recognizes you as an achiever, or certain types of activities that kids are like, wow, they noticed that, and so sometimes those little things like that. But more or less, it's the presence, and the most important and powerful thing that New Hope can do is to pray for peace in our community here and in our country.
Yes.
Because as it says, the prayers of the righteous availeth much. And having been around New Hope, I know that there are some righteous people that are truly there who really want things to be better.
Yeah.